I want to thank you all for coming here tonight and for the taping. I'm sure a lot of the people in the apartments in the complex will see this at some time or another, and you certainly may want to review it again as well. So thank you all for being here. My name is Howard Sherdit, for those of you who do not know who I am, have not heard me before, and certainly from the people who are in their apartments. Howard J. Sherdit, that's exactly right. It's on the flyer. My background is I am from Boston. I graduated Harvard College with a degree in psychology, sociology, and cultural anthropology. Served in the U.S. Air Force in Korea. Came back and went to Columbia Graduate Business School, have a master's in business administration and international business. Worked at a number of companies and ended with the IBM Corporation, where I worked for 30 years in marketing, management, and in education. For the last 8 years, I've been talking to people like yourselves. I've been here maybe for 5 years, but for 8 years I've been doing this at libraries, independent living, assisted living, community centers, Jewish community centers, and private organizations on a variety of topics, many of which I've already discussed here. Tonight's topic is immigration, assimilation, and the middle class. And there's a connection between all of them. It is a complex topic. It is a controversial topic, especially in this country, but truthfully, in most countries of this world. Especially becoming very controversial because it now relates to religious matters as well as political and economic. It's all over the world, and we'll discuss much of that tonight. The fact is that man has been migrating from the very beginning of time. All archaeological finds and all DNA now, to verify even that, prove that man originated in Africa. So if there was no migration, immigration, or emigration, we'd all be talking in Africa today. And that's factual history. Fact is, man moved from Africa to the Middle East, really, and the cradle of civilization is where we're fighting, and maybe the grave of civilization today, the Middle East. I've covered the Middle East, and I'll cover it again, but tonight, let it be just said that that is the cradle where farming began, government began, laws began, religions began, and we all know that. And yet now we're fighting for a lot of different reasons there. But migration is something that all living organisms do and have done from the very beginning, not just man. Animals have migrated. Birds, we may be very well aware of the birds migrating because we all hear every day now about avian flu, right? That's going to be coming here. How can it come here? It's over in Asia. Well, because birds carry this. And so they're migrating all the time. So the concept of migration exists in everything. The very fact that viruses and bacteria migrate, and they mutate, and they change. So the very first statement I make is that you either migrate, adapt, conquer, or die. And it goes for all living things. We're mainly talking tonight certainly about man and what our situation is. And immigration is a very hot topic. If it weren't for all these natural disasters, if it weren't for Iraq, it would probably be the top topic in this country because of what is this country is changing because of migration. Now, most people feel, let's say a large number of people feel very negative things towards migration, but I will point out some of the positive things about immigration, because there are many positive things. As a matter of fact, I would think that everybody in this room is the product of some immigrant at some point of time or other. If you're a Native American, raise your hand. Well, there's nobody here? Even the Indians that came here, even the Indians, American Indians that came here, came over a land bridge over Siberia. So they were immigrants at one time. As I said, everybody really came out of Africa. Whether you're black, white, green, blue, that's where the origination is. Whether you believe in intelligent design or evolution, which is another topic totally, it's still the same thing. Man, as we know ourselves to be, have always migrated. This country is the product of migration of a massive sort from all parts of the world, which is different historically than in the rest of the world. And that we'll come to that in a moment. There are internal movements in all countries and at all times. By the way, I will call on you to voice your opinion as you have in the past, or as I have asked you to do so. And I just request that no one or two people try to dominate it, and that you all have a chance to ask a question, raise an issue, say something that I want to correct me with, or maybe add to something that I may have said. So I will call on you for that as well. But the fact is that there are internal movements today, and have always been, on migration. It's not always outside a country's borders or outside a continent. We have migration of a vast amount in this country today, unless the hurricanes stop that in some, or make a reverse migration, because there are whole segments of the population of this country that have moved south to the Sun Belt, to either Arizona or Florida or Southern California, to the southern part of this country. That's a massive migration, massive. There have been massive migrations in China, from the western part of China to the eastern part, where all the manufacturing is, where all the major cities are, where all the luxuries are, where all the potential for advancement are, outside of the villages and little peasantry locations all over that country. It's true in Mexico. The biggest city in the world is Mexico City, I believe, 12 million people. Cities have always been, and that's the root of civilization, is cities. And cities have always been attraction points for people. That's internal migration. So migration is here to stay. It's always been here, and we're not going to stop it by building walls in the over Mexico area or having armed guards there. Migration will continue. Immigration will continue. There are people from China that get in boats and they put them in cargo holds, and they spend months at sea and end up on our shores. They have found them dead in cars and boxcars going from Europe to England. People migrate. Africans are fleeing in Africa today, and their main entry is in Spain. Black Africans, okay? We now know, obviously, in the news today, one of the most, that's coloring all the news in a sense about migration, is what's happening in France. The controversy of immigration, the controversy of assimilation, the controversy of what is the middle class. And we'll get into that just in a moment. There's legal and illegal immigration. Legal immigration is permissible in this country for a lot of reasons. For instance, how many work visas do you think we give? How many classes of work visas do we have in this country? Does anybody know?
How many classes of what?
Yeah, work visas. People that come here to work. Of course, a lot of people come here to work and never go home. But that's, in a sense, almost legal, right? Well, there's H1B, H2B, J1, E1, E2, L1, O1, TN, H3. Those are all legal definitions that apply to certain people that are allowed to legally come here. Okay? And you're not aware of all these things, and not that we or I should be aware of all this, but there are many legal ways to come to this country. To get a green card, how do you get a green card? You know, lottery, marriage, being an investor, having a position that no other person can fill. There's a lot of reasons to get, but that's the legal areas, right? Some people don't want legal people to come here either as immigrants. They just don't like immigrants. But that's true, that's been the truth since the beginning of this country, which is the pristine image of what an immigrant is and an immigrant society is. Wasn't it Emma Lazarus that said something that's imprinted on the Statue of Liberty? Immigration is the blood of this country, and I'll explain why it's the blood of a lot of countries. The fact is that immigrants have always been not acceptable people. They come in with strange customs, they come in with strange languages, they come in, they're poorer, dirty, whatever you want to call it, and they're shunned and they're put in ghettos. And that's been the history of this country. Whether it's the Jews, the Irish, the Italians, that's how it's always been. And that's true, but in this country, there's a difference in the other countries. In this country, there's a word that I use called assimilation, which occurs. Most people come here and want to become Americans. You all came from different parts of maybe Europe. If I was speaking to a more diverse audience, I could say from the world. Because people today coming here from where? In 1965, they changed the rules for immigration to this country, opening it up not to just Northern Europeans and Europeans in general, but to Asians, Africans. Witness what's happening around you now. I go to the bank and I get served by a clerk. There's very rarely an American's voice coming at me. It's always tinged with some foreign accent. Indian, Korean, Chinese, somebody. It's the same when you have construction today. Most construction workers building all these wonderful homes in Florida and in Arizona and New Mexico and Southern California, very few of them speak English. Matter of fact, probably nobody speaks English. Who are the people who are filling up our abattoirs or slaughterhouses out in the Midwest? Nobody speaks English. They're all foreign and they're all illegal immigrants. The fact is we need illegal immigrants in this country, and we have to figure, in my view, this is my opinion, we have to figure out a way to make it legal and less dangerous for them and for us and for everybody and less controversial. But we'll come to that because you all have your own particular ideas on that count. The big difference with permanent immigrants in this country is that they have been assimilated into this culture, into the values and the ideals that the founding fathers put forth in the 1770s. The fact is that even though many of them were slaveholders, even though many of them were shady characters even, cheated on their wives and did this and did that and did all sorts of things, they had ideals that were somewhat pure, because we're all living the advantage of the Constitution of this country. And the fact is that when my grandparents came over, my father's parents, when they came over in the 1890s, they refused to speak their native language. They only spoke English, and they forced their 6 children only to speak English because they wanted them assimilated. Even though they were prejudiced against, because prejudice is part of life everywhere, fortunately, unfortunately rather. In this country it still exists, but less than it ever has. But in those days, if you were a certain religion, color, ethnic group, you couldn't go certain places. Even today, there are places, clubs, cooperatives in Manhattan where certain groups cannot get into. So that still exists. The fact is, however, that it exists in a smaller and smaller proportion in this country, and by far a smaller proportion than in the rest of the world. So as bad as it may seem to be to each of us individually, it's better than anywhere else. And I'll cover some of that. You don't need me really even to tell you that anymore, because the last 3 weeks, what's happened in France? What's happened in France? It's a whole combination of things. It's a combination of things which says, if you don't have a society that accepts people, they don't even want to assimilate. There's a combination now in Paris or in France where the native population, the French, They don't want these people in their areas, in their jobs, in their lives. It's a free, democratic society, yet their culture says, and they officially say they want assimilation. They actually do a lot of things to force assimilation, such as the law which said that you cannot wear headdress of any kind in a public school. So that meant the Arab girls could not, or the Muslim girls could not wear their headdress, but it meant that Jewish boys couldn't wear yarmulkes, and it meant that Christian girls couldn't wear crosses because they're dedicated to being a secular society. But the fact is, the ordinary French citizen and the French businesses and government do not employ these foreigners, these immigrants. There's a great deal of prejudice against them. And that's on the one side. On the other side, you have the people who are coming in, mainly Muslim, who are setting up their own lives, their own businesses, their own schools, their own culture, independent of the culture of that country. It's already happened in Germany, it's happening in France, it's going to happen everywhere, Italy, Spain, everywhere. The point is, because those countries do not have their new citizens or new entries assimilate, there's an aversion to it. There may be an aversion here, but there's a culture of accepting dissimilar people. The Indians from India have been absorbed quite easily in this country, and they're a recent immigration group. The Koreans have been easily assimilated into this country, and they're a recent immigration group. That could not happen if you went to Korea. If you went to India, you could not be assimilated as easily in those countries. But here, people are. And that's a historical truth. And it's a historical truth because the Constitution made it something that we all bought into, and our parents bought into, or whoever came over here initially as an immigrant. In spite of prejudice that's here, prejudice has been fought and overcome. In these other places, it has not been overcome for the most part. And we see the result of it where? In France today. Now, part of it is the economy, and the fact is that they have large unemployment. When you have large unemployment, the people that don't get employed are the poor, the people who don't speak the language, or the people that are not like us. And that's what's happening in parts of the world. So that is actually the strength of this country, is the fact that we do have immigration. And you may argue, and we'll hear some of you probably argue against illegal immigration. But I say if we didn't have illegal immigration, you might not have your garbage picked up, and you certainly wouldn't have your home in Florida, okay? And you wouldn't have maybe meat on the table, and you wouldn't have your fruit picked and your beans picked and potatoes picked, because that's who does it, illegal immigrants. Whether the government says it or doesn't say it, that's who are employed and that's who do it. And if they weren't doing it, some people would do it at 5 times the wage level, or there probably wouldn't be any people, let's face it. Because in my neighborhood, and you're living here now, so you're not facing that, you did at one time, have a house. You had a house and you had a snowstorm. Tell me, maybe in the old days, like I did when I was a youngster, I went around and I made good money shoveling snow. It was a bonanza. I used to pray for snow when I was a kid. I made good money. Well, now when it snows, not one person, I've been living where I am for 30-something years, not one English-speaking person has come to my door to shovel my walk. Okay? So a lot of people would be homebound if you didn't have some illegal immigrants willing to do that work. And it's your children and your children's children. Do they really want to be waste collection people? Do they really want to work as butchers? Maybe your parents did, maybe you did. But your children don't want to do that. They're lawyers, investment bankers. No? Doctors? No? Who you want your... So those lower level jobs have to be filled if we're going to maintain a vibrant society. And it's always the new immigrants that come in and do that. That was true when your grandparents came, or you, or your grandparents, or great-grandparents. They did that work, didn't they? And they scraped and saved so that people could get college educations and get better jobs. The newer immigrants from India and Korea and China, they know that and they do it. Some others may not do it. It's not in their culture to do it. But in those cultures, education means something, because they knew that if they didn't do it back home, they would have been in the underclass too. So they came here and said, I'm going to work harder, just like you and your parents and your grandparents worked harder than the natives. Natives don't like to work. That's happened in Germany. They imported Turks to do all the dirty work. Okay? Now they're going to rue the day that they invited so many in, because they got problems. Beyond just economics, it becomes religious at this point, because you have fundamentalist Islamists who are taking advantage of the fact that in Europe, you have a growing Islamic population that has not assimilated, and eventually they're going to be more Muslims in Europe than there are going to be Christians or non-believers or whatever you want to call them in Europe today. And that will be, by the turn of the 21st century, will be an Islamic continent. That's predicted by everybody, not just me. So the point is, in this country, we've assimilated people. Can we somehow break apart and balkanize and have ghettos here and ghettos there? There are people that do that. The Mennonites, the Amish. We have segments of them. You want to go to Brooklyn? You go to Brooklyn. Borough Park, you want to go there? The point is that there are ghettos still here, people who will set themselves out differently, how they dress, what they do. But that's a fraction of the population. Most people come here want to be Americans. As bad as that word is to a lot of people in the world, that's what people want. So that's what immigration is. Now, does anybody up to this point have anything to say concerning anything I've said so far? Yes?
Does anthropology try to determine different appearances of mankind?
Does anthropology try to determine the differences in mankind? I have no idea. You tell me. Since you raised the question, you might have the answer.
If we all originated in Africa,
yes,
how come we have the Oriental features, the European features?
Well, if you're an evolutionist, that's part of the evolutionary theory. If you're an intelligent design, I don't think you can explain it. But under evolution, you can explain it. There are different reasons why in Africa, for instance, people have darker skin, or in the Middle East, because the sun is more intense. And if the skin wasn't evolved to be darker, then it would absorb too much of the sun.
The fact of the matter is
Pardon?
that dark materials absorb more heat and ultraviolet rays.
Well, maybe that's their problem. I can't answer the question that you have posed.
Let it be.
Well, you do have the answer.
I don't think anybody has the answer.
Okay. The point is that the DNA tests that have been done so far, because DNA is a recent technological advancement, that DNA tests have proved that you can go, there are companies now being formed. IBM, as a matter of fact, has been in joint development with some companies to develop tests to go even far back as 10,000 years. And there are people now charging $100, $200, companies, to trace your ancestry. That's a fact. That's happening right today. So we can have a debate on evolution versus creationism or intelligent design, but that can be an hour or two discussion. And it's a debate because it becomes a religious aspect of that. It's not science, it's not this, it's not that. But the fact is that man has spread. The fact is man has moved.